in Hawaii, sometimes certain places can have different names, but it's the same place and it can be confusing. So we're going to talk about why that is up next. What's going on, friends? Dylan Nonaka here at the Big Island Video Blog, and today we're going to talk about place names and why we have the place names we have and why it can be a little bit confusing in Hawaii when you're referencing a place based on what type of reference you're using, whether or not you're using one of the more traditional ancient naming names of an area, or if you're using a more modern way of naming it like zip code. So the first thing is that to understand the way things got their names in ancient times, which we still use today, is the Hawaiians had an ingenious way of dividing land, which was very practical. When you had different chiefs and communities responsible for an area, they would divide it in a pie-shaped division from the tip of the mountain down to the ocean, and it was called an Ahupua'a. And what that did was it gave that chief and that community the resources from the mountain all the way down to the ocean. So they would have the mountain resources of trees and farmlands and grasslands all the way down to the low-lying areas where you would have fishing resources and the ocean resources that could be traded and used throughout that whole entire division of land. And so we still use that today. Most places are still called those same Ahupua'a names, and a lot of times people don't know that that's the reason why. And that's why a place like Keoho in Kona has Keoho Beach down by the water, and then you also have Keoho Mauka up in the mountains, and it's all Keoho. It's a Keoho Ahupua'a, but they're very far away from each other. One is way up in the mountains and one is in the oceans, and everywhere in between is Keoho, but that's why it has that name. And those divisions are all the way down, and you can look at old maps, and it's very interesting to look at all of the different divisions. Some of them we don't use anymore, so we're not as familiar with them, but a lot of them are still used today in terms of the way that we name places on the island. But what confuses things is that then we've overlaid the modern way of naming things like zip codes, and so you put a zip code on an area and call it a town, and then now people think that that is what that whole area is called, is what that zip code is. And it can be confusing when you're referencing a place depending on who you're talking to, because you can reference a place like Captain Cook where I live, and Captain Cook to me is a very small area around where I live in South Kona, little coffee farming town. But Captain Cook, the zip code is enormous, and it runs 40 miles down the coastline. And so you can look on Zillow or on Trulia or on Realtor.com and see that a property has an address of Captain Cook, and you think, oh wow, this must be really close to Kailua, just a few minutes down the road. But no, it's actually 45 minutes or an hour away, because it's in the southern tip of the Captain Cook zip code. It is not in Captain Cook town. And so that can be a little bit confusing when you're searching for property, understanding where something is, because the place names, depending on whether or not it's more of a traditional place name or a modern place name, can be very different. And then you also have issues where there are different islands that have the exact same place name. So you have Waimea on the Big Island, but you also have Waimea on Kauai. You also have Kailua on Oahu. You also have Kailua in Kona. So different islands can have the same place name, but they're on totally different islands. And so you have to kind of understand and get familiar with the different areas and how they're named and how people reference them, to make sure you kind of understand exactly what folks are talking about. And it's always good to get some advice from somebody local who understands that stuff and can help you navigate that, because there are the larger divisions also. Like when you say Kona, sometimes people think Kona is just Kailua-Kona, but somebody like me that grew up here, I think that Kona is all of West Hawaii. So if you say Kona, could be in many different places. I gotta know exactly where in Kona you're talking about, because there's Hulualoa, there's Honalo, there's Honanao, there's Miloli'i, there's all different areas that can be 45 minutes away from each other that are still generally in the Kona district. Just like Hilo on the east side is generally, people reference Hilo, they're referencing the east side of the island, but there's Waikea, and there's Kaumana, and there's Waikea-uka, and there's all kinds of different areas inside of Hilo that are part of the larger Hilo zip code, but there's sub-districts that give you more specific a more specific location of where that area actually is. And so I hope that didn't confuse you any further about place names in Hawaii, but there's lots of great history and culture behind how places got their names. And if you ever want to look into it, there's lots of great books that explain that stuff. And you can always talk to an old timer and get the stories about how things got their names and what they mean. And so it's a really cool thing about Hawaii. It's very unique, I think, in a sense, because it's not as standardized as it is in other places, but it can be confusing. So it's always good to get get spun up and educated on it, so it doesn't confuse you when you get here, and especially if you're looking for property, you're looking in the right place. So if you have any questions about that, as always, you can put them in the comments below or email me at dylan@buybigisland.com, and we'll get back to you. And thank you guys for listening. I'll talk to you guys next week. Aloha.